welcome back to Memories of a Musician. I'm your host, Vito DiSalvo. Once again, we have a nice program for you. Very different tonight because I'm going to talk about and feature my Symphony No. 1. And I'm going to give you a lot of background about it. Hopefully it'll be a little bit educational too, so that you'll learn a little bit about the form, the classical form of a symphony, and why composers wrote symphonies. I'm going to start with, everybody has a bucket list, right? It was a good movie, by the way. My bucket list had one item on it, and that was to write Symphony No. 1. And the reason is that over the years, I went to school for my master's degree in music theory and composition, studied with some great composers at the University of Miami. But I was a band guy. I played the euphonium, which is clearly a band, like a British band instrument. You don't find it in orchestras. You'll find it in marching bands and brass ensemble type groups. So it's not an orchestral instrument. So I never really had the opportunity. I mean, I wasn't in orchestras except a little bit in high school where I played the trombone there. And most of the original compositions that I wrote were for symphonic band. I had never written for orchestra. There was one time in my teaching career, I had a really great trumpet player in 1981. And I was a fan of the late Chuck Mangione. And I wrote a piece similar, I guess, a style you'd say of a Chuck Mangione piece for my trumpet player. And that was when I was conducting the orchestra. So I did that piece. Other than that, I'd never written anything original. And over the years, as I worked with many different artists, I orchestrated their entire libraries for full orchestra, from piano to rhythm section, a couple horns, strings, full orchestra. So I had done a lot of orchestration, and it was really something that I just really loved, the orchestra, and really wanted to write a original piece for orchestra. So now I put this on my bucket list to write a symphony. You might say, well, why would you start with a symphony? It's such a big work. Well, I guess my personality or whatever, I just might as well start at the top. Why write a 4-minute piece and then work my way up? So I just decided to write a symphony. I had written several pieces that were multi-movement pieces. You might say, what is a symphony in this particular art form? And how did composers centuries ago figure out this genre in its general format? Well, composers typically wanted to write a piece with several different styles and even different tempos, which would be the speed of the piece, within one piece of music. So it worked out best to write several movements in that same piece of music that would have some common threads throughout all of those movements, rather than trying to write everything in one continuous piece of music. So that's why we have the various movements. So the common format for a symphony is to have 4 movements. And I say common because there are many exceptions. You can find symphonies that are 3 movements. You can find 7 movements, even 11 movements. But typically, the classical version of a symphony is 4 movements. And that's most common. What are those movements? The first movement is a fast tempo. Okay, the opening, typically. And again, there are always exceptions to these. But typically, a strong opening, fast, usually sonata allegro form. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The second movement, slower tempo, the adagio, we call it, would be the Italian word for slowly, gentle, lyrical, typically an ABA form or theme and variations. The third movement is kind of a medium. It can go different ways. Sometimes a fast tempo, and it uses a dance form, either a minuet or a scherzo. In my case, I use a waltz, like an Italian waltz, because I've written many Italian waltzes for my band, We3. I mean, we played dance music and Italian dance music. And it was a simple, for me, it was a very common, let's say, form to write as an Italian waltz. That's my third movement. And then the fourth movement, I go back to a faster tempo, typically a rondo or a sonato rondo or sonato allegro form. And you get that term again, sonata allegro form. Now, a lot of your piano composers wrote sonatas, like Mozart and Beethoven, Haydn. You can hear all of these composers back in the classical period wrote sonatas, and that is a form, a structure. There is a certain format, so to speak, okay, that they follow. So in sonata allegro form is a pretty common form for a lot of music, not just symphonies, but for a lot of different pieces. And you have the introduction could be optional, because sometimes there's an introduction, sometimes it starts right out with the main opening theme. And in my case, my Symphony No. 1, there is no introduction. It starts right with theme 1. And then there's a development. All music is about, theme and development. I don't care if it's a pop tune, a folk tune, it could be the most complicated classical piece, whatever. There is some theme and let's develop that theme and work with those notes of that theme to make more music, right? And more interesting things with those same notes. Now, I guess the classic example would be Beethoven, what he wrote in the first movement of the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and you had 4 notes, da, 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 and he wrote the whole movement based on those 4 notes, and it took off from there. And if you listen to it, you'll hear those reoccurring notes throughout the whole symphony. That's developing those 4 notes. That was the motif. That was the theme right there. You have the exposition or the presentation of themes, the development of the themes. You have the recapitulation, meaning those themes, typically there are 2, one theme 1 and theme 2, and contrasting. The first one is usually, let's say in this case, an up-tempo, strong thing, and the second is more melodic in a different setting. And then those themes can come back, and we call it recapitulation. And they could come back individually, a little bit developed in a different way. They could come back in the original form. They could come back together. Sometimes it's pretty interesting as a composer to create a melody and then say, okay, the second theme, I'm going to make it so it can coincide with the first theme. And then I can present at the very end or near the end of the piece both themes together. And I do that in my symphony at some point. And then, of course, after recapitulation, you have the coda. And coda is basically it's a word for the meaning ending, and the ending of the piece, the very end of the movement. It reinforces the original tonality and provides a sense of stability. And then, you're off to the end. So now we have a general sense of what we're dealing with in sense of a piece of music, okay, in a symphony. I would like to share with you the genesis of my symphony. When did I start? What was the thrust behind it? When I gave you a little bit of that. When did I finally sit down and compose it? And how long did it take? Well, in 2015, I was officially retired from my teaching position. My group We3 had closed up shop in 2014. And though I was still performing and directing and touring, I seemingly had a little more time on my hands and time to focus, which is what is needed if you're going to compose a serious piece and lengthy piece of music, especially for full orchestra. So in 2015, I have a friend, and unfortunately he passed away just a couple months ago. His name was John Del Monte, and John Del Monte was an artist, a visual artist. We became friends. He became a fan of my music. I became a fan of his artwork. And he called me every holiday. He called me every 2 weeks just to say hello. He was never on the phone very long. But he says, I just want to say hi. How you doing? How's your symphony coming? When I told him about the symphony, he was totally elated. He couldn't say enough. He wrote me a beautiful letter, and I might even post it on my website because it's just a tribute to him and the way he felt about music and the arts and about me and the fact that I was going to undertake this project. So he was a great person and a wonderful artist. And I want to show you a picture of John and I in my studio right here. There's John. Now, at this time, when he passed away a couple months ago, he was 3 days from being 101. And so at this point, he's well in his 90s, probably between 95. In 2015, I believe he was 95. And he was probably, and you could see I wouldn't say he's lecturing me, but he's guiding me, instructing me. And I said he became my muse throughout this symphony and as I was writing it, because he was always contacting me. How's the symphony coming? Melody, 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 he would say to me. That was his big thrust. So that was wonderful. And we had a great time together. It's just a lot of good times. One of the things John told me, he said, and it's funny because my guest from last Wednesday, Benny Benak Jr., and his son was with us as well, Benny the Third. They both said the same thing too, is that it's nice if you can document the things that you do throughout your career. And so many of us musicians, we are so busy doing what we do, we don't have time. And even though it's so simple to pick up your phone, and it sure is a lot easier these days with the phone, digital phone, to capture a little bit of video or a picture. But certainly, as opposed to the older days before we had that digital system. But anyhow, John said to me, take pictures, take videos of you in the studio writing, take pictures. And I really never did it other than a couple pictures with him. And then he would call me and have breakfast. Come to breakfast. I want you to meet these people. And he would bring different people in for breakfast, and I would meet people, and he would tell them that I was writing a symphony, and when it's done, we're going to get to hear Vito's symphony, whatever. It was all good. So then I have this picture, which is just really another picture of us in the studio. And even though his age, he was still got around pretty well. In his 90s, driving to my house, which was probably a 5 or 6 mile drive, and ate and drank everything I did. And most of you know I made homemade wine pretty much all my life. And he would say, give me the strongest wine you have. So that was John Del Monte. He was great. And here's a picture I want to show you. This is a good example of what I was talking about. We had a lunch together. You'll see John on one end. You'll see myself on the other end. And then next to John is a very dear friend of mine, Ken Marino. And Ken was an engineer in his life, but he's a huge music fan and just a great guy, wonderful guy. Next to Ken, between Ken and me, is Dennis Astorino, who is a well-known architect. He did all the renovations on the Kaufman House at Falling Water. He worked at the Vatican, renovating parts of the Vatican. He was a very, very well-known architect. And what's interesting, John Del Monte had a school in Italy, in Lucca, Italy, which is where Puccini was from. In 47 years, he taught creative arts studies at Lucca, Italy in the summers. And Dennis Astorino, although he was an architect, and I'm telling you, an accomplished architect, went to Italy to study with John Del Monte, sketching. So I'm going to show you a couple of sketches that John did real quick. This is unbelievable. He did this in front of a group of guys that I was with. We were out to dinner, 12, 15 guys. In 10 minutes, he sketched this in 10 minutes. And just to watch him do this process, it was amazing. Because we were there, it was on an easel, a blank piece of paper, and then he created this within 10 minutes. It was amazing. Here's another little sketch that John Del Monte did, and you can see John is standing there holding a paintbrush, and you see a cellist. You see down in the far left corner a bowl of fruit. There's all kind of there's 100 things in this little drawing. This one, you could see the binder at the top. He had sketchbooks, and every day he would sketch, just like he would tell me, you should write music every day. Just write something, write a theme, whatever. So anyhow, that was John Del Monte and how he impacted what I did as a composer, and was really, a very positive force for me to say, I got to get this done. And I really wanted to get it done for John. And he was getting up in years. I'm thinking, I got to get this done. So here's what happened. In 2015, when I started, I was still touring and I was working with artists as a music director. I was still busy. And in my role, I had to contact all these technical people. I mean, hundreds of emails for one particular concert. And so I was still busy, and I would write. I wrote tons of themes, and there was only one theme that would stick, that would become relevant to this symphony number one. And I could tell you later about it, but it's actually the second theme of the first movement. I started in 2015, but I didn't get anywhere. I wasn't happy with anything that was happening. And of course, I couldn't spend much time. What happens in 2020? The pandemic hits. COVID-19 changes everybody's life. Everybody's world, really. I couldn't go anywhere. The touring was over, working was over. We couldn't even socialize. People couldn't come to our home. I couldn't go to their home. So I said to my wife, this is a good time for me to go down to the studio and write my symphony, because I have the time and I can focus. So it was around April 1st in 2020. I started writing, and I wrote in my notes that it was like a freight train with no brakes. It was pouring out. It was faster than I could get it down on paper or in the computer to record it. And so anyhow, I'd say by the end of June or mid-June, it was done. I actually had written the 4 movements and recorded them. And then it became a thing of, now I need to get the printed parts and printed scores all straightened out. And I did all this. And of course, when I want to show you 2 pictures of my studio where I lived in South Park in Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. And this is where I composed the symphony. And this is one picture. And it's just a little workstation. It's nothing elaborate at all. Here's a picture of John and I sitting there, John Del Monte and I. And the reason I have this picture, you can see a little bit more of the space itself. You see my keyboard on both sides, one keyboard there and one keyboard there. And I used 2 sample libraries. And what I mean by that is these companies would, for instance, sample, they'd have a violinist come into a studio and they'd have them play so many notes in so many different ways, whether it's pizzicato, plucking the string, or with a bow, or different kind of bowings. And then they would record all that. And of course, then they would sell those little samples. And that's what I used to create this symphony. And I had 2 different libraries. One was the Vienna Symphonic Library. The other was called East-West Audio from the United States. And so this is the space. That's all you need in order to accomplish that task. There were no live musicians other than me playing the keyboard. So when I have that sound in my computer, I can make it go to my keyboard, and then I play that if it's an oboe, for instance, or a clarinet or a flute, I assign it to my keyboard, and then my keyboard becomes that instrument, and then I can play that part. And that's how I composed this symphony. Once I completed the recording, I called upon a dear friend, Tim Milko, who's a former member of my group We3. He's a sound and recording engineer, to mix all of those orchestral sounds. And then I asked my friends Jim and Ulrika Anderson, and by the way, all of these folks have been guests on my podcast, from Anderson Audio in New York City, to master the project, which is another step in the recording process. And I also called upon our daughter, Gina Gallardini, to create and design the cover art. And just to show you here, this is a CD, and that's the front. I'm not holding it right, I guess, but that's the front cover. And then this is the back cover, and it has all the 4 movements and the description, which you're going to see anyways as we move forward. And my daughter, Gina, did all that. And another friend, Gina Morgana, who helped me with the liner notes. And of course, my wife, Lana, is always right beside me, helping to guide me in all of my projects down the highway of love and success. And I say that in all sincerity, because that's about how it goes. Now, with the help of my editor, Paul Silver, whom you're going to meet, he's going to come on the program here in a few minutes. Paul is a highly experienced professional orchestral musician. I then, with Paul, set out to prepare the printed scores and parts after this recording was done. And that was a task that took more than 2 years to complete. Paul and I got to know each other very well and spent many, many, many hours working on this. And there's a photo that I want to show you. And this is when I completed the symphony, and this is before I got started with the printed parts. I was so anxious. For John Del Monte to hear the symphony. I invited him out to the house, for a lunch. And I invited my sisters. My older sister, Judy, was there, but my younger sister, Tina, was still working, so she couldn't be there. And John had a friend at that point who drove him out to my home. And there's a picture. And you see his friend on the far right is Al Ferrari. That's Al, and then John, myself, my sister Judy. And this was the first time that I actually played it for my family and my sister. And for John, this is the first time he heard the symphony. And, of course, I had other people that heard the symphony because, I wanted to share my ideas with some of my musician friends that I really respected. And there were many. There were very, many musicians. I don't know that I'm going to go through the whole list of them, but it's available on my website. If you go to vitodisalvo.com, you can read all about the symphony here. But just to name a couple, Paul Silver, who is my editor, his brother, Daniel Silver, is a professor of clarinet at the University of Colorado College of Music. And I had a couple clarinet questions, so he said, "Why don't you ask my brother?" So that was an easy one. Matt Litterini, who is a French horn player in Pittsburgh for the Ballet and Arpa Orchestras, the CLO Orchestra, very good friend. These are all friends that Fred Danchenko is a bassist. I would call on him. Ernie Pontier, again, you've heard that name many times on the podcast. And just to run it by, to say, hey, what do you think of this, kind of thing. So another guy that really contributed a lot for me was a guy named Gerald Unger. And like Paul Silver, Jerry Unger is a retired percussionist from the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. And Jerry Unger now lives in Naples, Florida. And I see him down here from time to time. And I arranged one time, Paul and his wife Linda came to visit us, and we arranged a dinner where Jerry and his wife Kathy came over for dinner. And we had it was fun listening to these two guys who are retired from the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra talk about their career with the orchestra and all the different touring that they did and different things. And I have a picture. This is in my backyard. And there's Paul on the left and Jerry Unger in the center. and then, of course, me on the far right. And so this was a really remarkable moment. I was able to ask Jerry about things that I needed to know. I needed to know about, symphonic percussion, how they approach the different parts, and how they divide up, how they want to read their music and things like that, very specific things. So anyhow, Jerry was very helpful to me, and we got together a few times to talk about those things. So I was learning as I was writing. I was, and I knew a lot as far as instrumentation and writing for these different instruments, but there was a lot that I had to learn too in the process. And so it was a good experience for me, both emotionally, to write a piece of music like this, and then also from a standpoint of learning more about what I love. That's writing music. Now that you have a sense of what all goes into writing a piece of music of this nature, I would now like to bring my dear friend, my editor, Paul Silver, onto the program to get into the nuts and bolts of the music and to play some excerpts for you. I'm not going to play the whole symphony because that was, first of all, it's 38 minutes long, and I'd rather play excerpts of it that are important because they're based on the themes and things like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program, Mr. Paul Silver. There he is. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Vito. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and share the airways for a little bit to talk about a piece that I love,
Well,
your symphony.
thank you. And, I remind the audience that you were also a guest on the program. I think you were episode 10, maybe. You were a guest on the program, and we got to talk about you with the symphony and all the things that you did. And so that was wonderful as well. So, and I really appreciate you being here today because you bring valuable things to the table that I can't, because you have so much experience with orchestral music. You've played hundreds of symphonies, I'm sure, and some of them hundreds of times. And so it's great. I wish I had that experience for sure, but it is what it is. We want to talk about the symphony, and this symphony, of course, has 4 movements, and so we're going to go movement by movement, each starting with the first movement. What would you like to say? Do you have any initial things you want to say before we get into the symphony itself?
Just that the composition for me, your piece, is filled with really the whole gamut of human emotion, some very dramatic moments, some sad moments, some excited moments, and the variety of the music is what captivated me. And the fact that you used an entire orchestra, which is all the woodwinds, all the brass, a very big and full percussion section, a wonderful harp part. I know you mentioned so many people. I know that Gretchen Van Hosen, our principal harp in the Pittsburgh Symphony, was helpful to you with some harp questions, and then a full string section. It's a wonderful piece from a musician standpoint, but also from an educator standpoint, because while the parts are challenging, every part is playable, and every part has important, fun, and emotionally captivating music to play. So it was really fun to help you put it into a score and parts, and I got to know it very well.
Sure. The only person that may have heard it more times than you and I was John Del Monte.
Right.
He used to call me and said, "I've just listened to your piece for the 47th time,"
He may have me beat then.
Yeah. That's funny. All right, so let me call up first.
So what you're going to see here is a picture of the trombone part in the beginning of the piece, and you have the brass playing this 7-note motive or theme. And I like to put words to this and think that it's This is my theme. Here it is. It's very declamatory and dramatic. And like you mentioned, Beethoven 5, like many composers, you start with something very strong, and then you just develop it from there. So I guess we're going to hear those first opening bars, 14 measures of the beginning of Symphony Number 1, first movement.
Okay.
So there you have the opening, which promises so much because it just sort of seizes your ears right from the start. You use this theme throughout the piece, and it's also used as a bridge, some of it, just a very short snippet to take us from one section to another and one emotion to another. Our next excerpt will feature the same motive, but instead of slow, dee, dee, da, da, it becomes dee, 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 and it becomes an allegro section, which we'll call the actual theme number 1. And that starts just I think in the strings, and then there's low brass, and then there's a counter melody that we hear, and then that theme dee, 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 with that counter melody, which is that blending and combination, which is, I think, one of my favorite compositional devices that you employ in this music, which is to give us something brand new and then immediately hear it a second time, but with old music. And I think of it as, you're walking through a town and you have a friend and you're holding hands, and then that friend holds another hand and another hand, and immediately all this music is linked. And from a music standpoint, if you're analyzing it, that's something that in school, people will point out as a technique that a composer uses. And in that sense, it almost sounds technical. And that's true. It's a technique you use, but the way you do it just feels musical and natural. And I know we've talked often about how you think of these things, and often you just do this. You don't think, oh, I'm going to introduce a new idea and then put it with the old idea. It's not like painting by numbers. And I think that's a great way to experience the music and know how genuine it is. So we'll hear this. This excerpt ends with the main theme that we just heard, but in a harmony that uses, instead of open sounds like perfect fifths and octaves and unisons, it uses clusters of notes in what we call a quartal sonority. That's like the word quart, like a quart of milk, and then AL. And that refers to chords built on fourths, which gives us some dissonances and a very different kind of sound. Not that your music sounds like that, but Aaron Copland in some music used that a lot. You might recognize it in Fanfare for the Common Man or some of his ballet music. Anyways, that kind of music is used, and because it's so dramatic and tense or dense, it really a little bit goes a long way. So we'll hear this next excerpt from the first movement, and this is the actual theme number 1, stated and then, as you said, developed, enhanced, modified, changed.
go.
So there it is, those dense dramatic brass chords, which serve as a bridge to music that is now leading to the second theme, which, as you said, was the one original theme that you had developed in your head and your heart that you actually used in the symphony. I guess we can show there's a couple pictures we have here. Right. This is a picture of a double bass part. And at the top of the page, you can see if it's big enough for you. It's a pizzicato section for the double bass, a little bit syncopated, which ushers in these kind of sinewy second theme that is played by the first oboe, which we'll see in the next page.
Okay.
And that theme, which is in the middle of the page, the dee da dee da dee, I'm singing in the wrong key, excuse me, is a beautiful kind of sensual piece theme that sounds vaguely, in the old days, you'd call it an Asian or Middle Eastern flair. You can almost see like a snake charmer, although that doesn't do the melody justice. And throughout the piece, again, you develop this so that sometimes it's beautiful and quiet, like it is with the one oboe, and then it becomes much more impassioned with a large group of the orchestra. So we're going to hear this section now.
Okay.
It's just a brief section with the double bass starting and then the oboe solo.
Okay. The double bass sets up the whole theme coming.
Right. And this music continues in a big vein, becomes even more complex with some woodwind flourishes that add as if it was, colors and shades of the music. If you're thinking of dancers, they would have hand, cymbals, hand castanets, and things like that. And then we hear a recap of the opening, recapitulation, meaning a review or a renewal, hearing it again. And it goes back and forth, both of these themes, and then it ends with a coda, which I think you will notice, I think we notate with a screen. So this is we're picking up the piece a little bit later to the end of the movement. And the word coda, I know you know this obviously because you are Italian and your family speaks Italian and you have heritage and culture. But for those of us who don't, I was amazed when I was as a student to learn that the word coda meant tail in Italian. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can use it to describe the tail of an animal also. But I know that meaning the end of the movement. And often the music is a little different than what's come previously, so that it's very clear that this is new and perhaps the end. And sometimes it's a little more subtle. So this is the last section of the first movement. Now the coda here ends the movement with a lot of drama, harkening back to the beginning notes, and a lot of punch in the brass of the percussion. It's almost a little pugilistic the way the notes get exclaimed at the end, but you really know you're at the end of the movement when it's ended.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's a great ending.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to mention, you mentioned about the tense music with the brass and the chordal harmony, and that's one particular thread that is heard in each of the movements throughout the piece. So that would be one common thread in the symphony, that my use of chordal harmony. And quite honestly, when I started writing band music, all the band music that I was listening to at the time, a lot of composers used chordal harmony, and I heard this, and I was like, it's nice because it's so tense. Music is about tension and release, right? And so it's so tense. It really helps to build the tension, and then you can release to something very, harmonic and melodic and pleasing, again, and so, but anyways, I wanted to mention that it's one thing that I use as a common thread throughout the whole symphony.
Yeah, and you have other moments where you'll just have one dissonant chord, which really is great when you've heard a theme once or twice, and then you have it a little different, and it's like a special spice that you're smelling or tasting for the first time. It's really, that's a great thing about the music as well. I guess we're going to go to the second movement now. So this is, I'll just mention really briefly, this is a first flute part, and you see right at the top, after those 12 bars, the flute is playing the main theme, and you'll hear it twice, once rather quiet and then more active with other notes underneath it. I think there are eighth notes that begin to drive it a little bit. Well, we'll hear the beginning of the theme here.
Okay.
And that music continues and becomes fuller until we get to the middle section of this movement, which is an entirely different idea. You've written a fugue here, and the word fugue has a lot of different ways to describe it, but essentially it's material, a theme that one instrument or one group of instruments will play, and then that group of instruments will continue quietly with other music underneath while a second group plays that original theme, and it gets passed around and around. You could, in some ways, it's similar to a round, like a row, row, row your boat, but different at the same time. But we will see the theme pictured here and played by the lowest stringed instrument in the orchestra, the double bass, and it's a wonderful theme. And then you will hear it tossed around, played fast, played slow, played with a counter melody, which is also wonderful. And again, that combination of the fugue being played at full bore with the brass playing this counter melody is one of those spots that always made me smile from the first time I heard it on my back porch a long time ago. So let's hear a couple minutes of the fugue, which again is the middle section of the second movement. the music continues for a little bit in this same vein, and then we hear a very big lyrical version of the opening flute theme. And
right.
This to me is one of the most impassioned appassionata moments in the piece, of which there are several. So we're going to hear that, and then the music will ebb and flow again, and will end very quietly with a solo cello and some accompanied by some quiet strings. So we've gone from all the energy in the middle before the fugue to this dramatic fugue, very big and bold. Now we have some bold lyrical music, and then it really ends very quietly. Obviously, a tremendous contrast from the first movement's ending.
Right. And you mentioned the cello, and it's actually playing that first theme of the second movement that the flute started with. That solo.
Right.
And but it's, as you said, it's kind of a little different setting, but it's the same theme. And here you go.
Yeah, there's the beautiful fine, the ending of the movement. Next, we go to the third movement of the symphony, and here your form harkens back to what was called the minuet and trio form of a typical inner movement of a symphony. A minuet, of course, is a dance in three. Here you've chosen a wonderful waltz, obviously also in 3 beats. When it was called a minuet and a trio, the form was minuet, then very contrasting music as a trio, usually in a different key, or the major version of the minor key or the minor version of the major key of the minuet becomes the trio. And then you end that and you immediately go back and repeat the minuet. So it's what is referred to as an A-B-A form.
Yeah.
And that's what we have here. And I think we can show a few individual parts just to illustrate a little bit.
I like to refer this movement as the Vito movement, or the We Three movement, because the waltz, most people that know me or heard my band and heard my recordings know that I've written a lot of Italian flavored music, waltzes, tangos, mazurkas, tarantellas, everything. And so to me, and anybody that hears this movement could visualize people dancing the waltz as they hear this, So I call it the beat. It's really me. I mean, it's really my, I don't want to say my roots, you know what I'm saying, my culture, whatever. It's where I grew up hearing this kind of music,
That's right. Well, and it's symbolic of you and Lana dancing on the highway of love and success.
In the swimming
success
pool.
and love, yeah. So actually you see two moments here. The beginning of the movement for the violin one joins all the other strings in playing a pizzicato introduction to the waltz, which begins at the end of the second line of music here. And then the music will continue for a while, and then we'll see the clarinet part in a moment, I think. The clarinet part is what you refer to as, again, starting on the third line, the response to the first part of the waltz theme. And in this case, I thought of dancing too. I mean, I think everyone would, as if a couple is dancing, and the main theme that we hear first in the violins and the strings is one of the two partners in the dance, the couple leading. And when the clarinet comes in a response, as if the other half of the couple decides to lead. And so there's almost two characters, and it's a question and a response. And so this music, which is just wonderful and captivating, we're going to hear now a little bit of it. And as the waltz becomes developed, you'll also hear some wonderful harmonies. The brass join in, and then there's a beautiful harmonic section with the French horns that again just adds another level of sort of poignancy and love to this beautiful waltz. So this is the beginning of the third movement. Okay, and we could go on dancing for a long time. The music continues. That's so wonderful. And it leads us to the very contrasting music of the trio section or the middle section. Very big and boisterous. Again, if I think of a visual with how my heart feels with the music, I feel like it's a whole town joining in a fair, in a festival.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You hear the main themes, then you hear a lot of woodwind additions, lots of great brass percussion effects, and as if fireworks and sparklers are going off. And it uses the percussion and the harp, as I said. We should listen to this. This is about a minute and a half of the middle section, which, as you'll hear, is very contrasting. I think we pick up with a few bars of the waltz so that you can actually hear the connection to the middle section.
All right.
Okay, the festival is cut short, unfortunately. We'll skip to the end of the movement so we can hear the quiet return of the waltz. There's still some the waltz, and then as it gets quieter and quieter, and it ends with just one violin and one double bass playing pizzicato and one violin playing the waltz melody.
Okay.
The,
There you go.
yeah, so everybody's had enough to drink and enough to eat, and they have to go take a nap now.
That's right.
Yeah. I love that. That's just wonderful. And so we have these two interior movements that, while having a lot of impassioned, boisterous music, also have very intimate and quiet moments. The last movement has a similar kinetic energy to the first movement in terms of its drama and its volume and moments of punch and drive. We have a page of part of the score.
That's
The
right.
score, obviously, for people, forgive me if everybody in the audience knows this, the score is a printed page of every single note that every single instrument is playing. And you read it vertically, obviously. So you can see near the bottom where the violin 1 and violin 2 play this bum, 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 bum. And then you hear in the second bar, or if you look up, you see the brass in the response, the dut, 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 dum. And so you can actually sort of visually see and hear the music at the same time. And the score, every page of the score has every instrument, whether they're playing or not. So if you look up an instrument, like for example, the brass don't play in the first measure, you see that symbol for a rest. So you can actually just look at any moment and know what's going on. And
Right.
people who are musicians and do this a lot, and particularly conductors need to do this, is to read a score as if it was a book and study it without hearing the music, much more than they would with the music.
Right. Right. Of course.
And so it's a written record, and it describes the tempo, the articulation, the dynamic, the volume of the music, and any other musical comments that the composer makes, to play dolce, play sweetly, to play drammatico, dramatically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the written score is really a very important thing. And when Vito and I worked on it, we tried to get it as precise to his wishes as possible, knowing that the beauty of music is not playing everything precisely the same every time, but that every moment and every time you play a passage, it can vary. It can vary with the audience, with the feeling of the musicians, with the size of the hall, with the atmospheric conditions, and so the tempo can change, and the dynamics can sometimes be a little different than what is written down, which serves as a suggestion only. So there's a lot that goes into this. So that's what this page, part of this page, is showing.
And I would say that in this case, you can see above the violin part the word agitato, and this is how I describe this: the opening of this fourth movement, the final movement, agitated, right? It means agitated, agitato, the Italian, and so that's the feeling, the emotion that you want to, as a conductor, that's telling the conductor what I'm looking for as a composer. This is the roadmap, and you follow the roadmap, right?
Right.
Okay, so we're going to hear the opening of this fourth movement now, right? It's the
Correct. So that beginning, to me, sounds a little bit like what we talk about when we hear the Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony, that idea of fate, this kind of unanimity and punch that the instruments have. We'll next hear the same theme, the opening theme, but developed and played much faster. So instead of boom, 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 it's boom, 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 and it continues on. And that's the development of this theme. And we'll also hear music similar to the beginning in this excerpt, but without the pauses. It just sort of goes straight through, which is even more like more emphatic punching and declamation. So after that jarring kind of power, we come to the second theme, and we'll hear an excerpt at of the first iteration of that theme with the oboe, and then joined by the bassoon. And this music is sort of soothing in my mind and is sort of needed after the angst and agitation of the first theme. And it sort of slows down our pulse a little bit.
Okay.
So this music continues exploring. You go through a lot of things that you've written about the themes and various treatments. We're going to end the audio portion with almost 5 minutes of music from the middle of the symphony, uninterrupted, to the end of this fourth movement. There's a one green I think we're going to show.
Right there.
Yeah, so if you can look in the middle on the fifth line, that is a different version of da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee, and it's kind of jaunty and a little lighter. It's a unexpected, I think, trombone solo, which is a treatment of that theme. then we hear the first theme and the second theme back and forth several times. And just before the end, we hear a very dramatic chorale, which is for me, I think, the dramatic high point of the whole piece. And there are many, but that one, if you had to rank them, that'd be my favorite. And then we come to the coda, which is driving and rollicking to the end, and again ends with a kind of punchy ending, much like Tchaikovsky's fourth ends too. And when your music evokes memories or thoughts of other composers, I must tell you that your music is wholly, I must tell the audience, wholly original, completely. Sometimes it's natural when you've played a lot of music, like anybody has a lot in their ears or their heart, that they say, oh, that reminds me of the feeling I get when I heard this or X or Y. And I say it only in the highest compliment to you. And at the same time, I marvel at all the originality and inspiration that went into this piece. It's impressive. So we're going to hear the last 5 minutes. I don't know if you want to add anything else, and just let you enjoy the ebb and flow of this dramatic music.
Before we play it, Paul, I wanted to mention, you mentioned about the chorale and the dramatic setting of that second theme. And what it is, first of all, the chorale is the harmony of that second theme without the theme.
Without the theme, just the underpinning, the harmonic underpinning,
and
right?
Then, after I go through that, then I bring the theme in, and it just makes it that much more powerful. And what's interesting is, I thought about ending the piece with that theme, right? And I guess it's look, when you're a composer, you can write whatever you want to write. It's okay. But I just thought to myself, well, it's a symphony. This is the end of the final movement. I need to make this a little more fiery and quick and, come to this. And then I mentioned it to you and you responded with.
Well, I talked about how originally Tchaikovsky had intended his Romeo and Juliet fantasy piece to end quietly with the famous dee dee oh, dee 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 da da dee dee, and he showed it to some friends, and at that point in his career, apparently his friends, and this may be a little apocryphal, but I think it's telling, said, "You're Tchaikovsky. You can't end this piece quietly like this. You must end it with a really dramatic thing." So, without having any friends tell you that, you decided to end the piece the way the Romeo and Juliet ends. But the lasting impression of that ending, even with the drama of that quick, short ending, is the chorale. And just so our listeners know, you've notated where, with some words on the screen, where that chorale begins without the theme melody above it, and then with the theme. So it'll be clear to us all. So this is the last bit of music. It's about almost 5 minutes, but to me, it goes by in a blur. Please enjoy the last bit of the finale of Vito DiSalvo's Symphony No. 1.
Here we go. Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
That's Symphony #1. Yeah, thank you. It's I failed to say at the beginning how much time I did spend writing. I said I started April 1st and finished about the midway of June, so maybe 2.5 months, 10 weeks. Wrote all that, recorded all of that, but I was working 12 to 15 hours a day. I never left that studio except to eat and sleep. and I was just, when you get into this and start rolling with this, you can't stop. It's the worst thing you can do is stop. You got to just let it flow and keep it going. And that's why I think it turned out the way it did, because it, good, bad, or indifferent, it was all flowing so well. And it was a lot of time to be in the studio, but it's what it takes, really. I mean, it really does.
Well, it's quite an achievement. You should be very proud.
I am. Thank you. And thank you for all the help. I could have never done what you were so invaluable with bringing your expertise of orchestral music to the table with these parts and with the scores, and honestly, you labored over that part of it the way I labored over the composition itself, and because you wanted everything to be exact and as precise and perfect as it could be. And I appreciate that so much, because now we're on a path now to find an orchestra to premiere the piece.
Right.
And that's my next goal, because now the parts and scores are ready. It's wonderful to be able to do what I do with the sampled sounds, but there is no replacement to have a live orchestra perform the piece, and you walk in, there's no greater feeling than walking into a concert hall and sitting in a chair and hearing your piece being played like that. That's an amazing moment in your life, because it's like you gave birth to this piece, right?
Yeah, it's your baby, it's your child.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to let you know that I learned a tremendous amount from you and from the process that I had not known or appreciated before, even though I'd had a lifetime as a professional musician. So I was and still am very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate everything. And I hope to get to see you here soon. And maybe we can break bread again together soon.
I would like that.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
We will do it again and get together soon and give Linda my best.
My best to Lana. And I forgot to mention one last thing, which is that one of the real fringe benefits of working all these meetings that weren't remote, we did a lot of remote work on phone and video, but every time I got to go over to your house to work, I got to eat. And so for that, I thank Lana. So that was a very enjoyable part of the process. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a pleasure having you. So you have a great evening, and thanks again for being my editor, my guest, and all that you contributed to my symphony. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Vito.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Take care. And there you have it. Another episode of Memories of Musician with my Symphony #1 and my dear friend Paul Silver, who, again, invaluable his work with me with the symphony. And by the way, if you want to hear the entire symphony, if you go to my website, vitodisalvo.com, you'll be able to read a lot about the symphony, and you'll be able to click on a link that'll take you directly to my YouTube channel, where you can listen to the entire symphony. And if you want to follow the score, the score is there as well as the music plays. You can actually follow the score if you'd like. And that is on, again, www.vitodisalvo.com, Symphony #1. Now, looking ahead to next Wednesday, March 11th, be sure to tune in to meet my special guest, a former student of mine from the West Mifflin Area School District, and the final drummer in my group We3, and that would be Brandon Barnes. Since moving to Nashville in 2013, Brandon has made his entire living playing drums, both performing in Nashville on national tours with a host of Nashville artists and in recording studios. He has performed and recorded with many artists, including Sonny Sweeney, Jake Clayton, Jenny Tolman, Candy Carpenter, Dave McElroy, Jeff Claiborne, Sean David, Rachel Lipsky, Grayson, Amanda McCoy, Porter Block, and Alexis Gomez, just to name a few. The list goes on and on. Brandon Barnes on Memories of a Musician on Wednesday, March 11th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope you enjoyed our presentation of my Symphony No. 1, and you have a great evening. Thank you.